Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Nick Files. I am your host, Nick Muley. And man, for starters, I got to say, what what a break! I mean, what kind of a little break I have after the last show I did, which was now about 2 weeks ago. Which I know originally I was supposed to do a show last week, but unfortunately I had to cancel because of various reasons. But I just got to say, it's definitely good to be back. And for today, oh man, I got a very good I got a very special episode for you guys tonight. Before I get started with it, I'm not sure if any of you guys have seen the announcement of the show lately, but I mean, because I made it earlier this afternoon, that we're going to be making a change with Nick Files for the next couple weeks. I thought, considering that it was getting close to the Halloween season, I decided I started giving this thought about, what would be more interesting of trying to make these like more Halloween type episodes, if you will. And I decided to make that change occur. Obviously, a lot of you guys have seen most of the places that I cover usually are historical or haunted locations or events. So, and just also before I get started, before I go into more detail, I just want to give some shout outs quickly. What's up, Nigel? Good to see you. Pickle Tom. All right, good to see he's here. Hello, Rita. Good to see you. So the way out things are going to be kind of a little bit different for Nick Files for the next couple weeks, and this is going to be going until I eventually take my break from the show, because I should probably say I don't want to get into too many details just yet, but I'm probably going to be taking a well-deserved break from doing this show as well as a few others on the network after the Halloween season's officially over. I might go into a little bit of November, but for the most part, I definitely need a well-deserved rest. But with that being said, though, until then, the change that we're going to be making, we are now going to be switching and focusing our attention from and making the transition from haunted historical locations and events to cryptids. So this point on, we're going to start focusing on cryptids, including ones that I think definitely deserve a lot more attention, because there's a lot of cryptids out there that are not often really talked about. And that's basically what I'm going to be talking about today. See, when you see a lot of these, paranormal cryptid shows, they always begin with the most notorious ones like Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, Mothman, the Jersey Devil, the Abominable Snowman, the Yeti, the Lizard Man, and the Chupacabra. I mean, the list goes on. And don't get me wrong, there definitely are a whole bunch of them that are certainly well known, but there's many others out there that are not often spoken about. God damn it, Tom Cockroach Cryptid. What's up, Matthew? Good to see you. Hello, Eric. So that's basically what we're going to be starting off with today. Instead of you starting off with the typical type of notorious cryptids, we're going to start off on a less famous one. And I know basically I started a few minutes late. If you guys didn't know, I was going to actually start at 5 o'clock instead of the typical 4:30 time, because I was actually putting this presentation together, and I definitely needed more time, definitely. So, yes, Matthew, I actually have heard of it. I think you're referring to the Vermont Pigman. I definitely have heard of that cryptid, but that's not the one that I'm going to be starting on tonight, but it is on my list. So eventually we will get to it. However, I can't make any guarantees that we're going to be doing this like anytime soon, because the way how I'm kind of looking at it with these cryptids, because there's so many of them, I'm kind of going pretty much like seasons, if you will. So for the next couple weeks, I'll definitely be sharing a handful of different cryptids, but I'm not going to do them all together, because again, it's a lot of work putting them together. So I'll probably do about a dozen or so cryptids we'll focus on. And unfortunately, I may not be able to cover all of them. That's basically what my goal is I'm kind of doing this by season. If we don't get to a particular cryptid this year, I'll focus on it next year when the Halloween season comes up. And I think this is what I'm going to be doing from this point on, when the late September, October Halloween season is near. Hello, Wayne. Good to see you. So, without further ado, what I'm going to talk about quickly, the first cryptid that we have on the list, and this is one many of you have probably not really heard too much about, but this one will be interesting because I wanted to start off small and try to start off, in an organized kind of fashion with these cryptids. And what better way than to kind of start off with that than doing it from your own home state, which is my case, Illinois. Although the majority of cryptids that I found in Illinois are definitely nowhere near the Chicago area, with the exception of the Mothman, of course. So most of the cryptids, including the first one I'll be presenting, is mostly focused down in southern Illinois, which I don't know if you guys have ever been down there, but as a resident and someone who lives near the big city of Chicago, you go down to southern Illinois, it is a completely different world down there. It's more rural, it's more farmland. There's only like two big cities. I mean, all you got is just maybe like St. Louis, just across from where the Illinois-Missouri border and the Mississippi River is. And also, of course, then you got Belleville, and that's pretty much it. Aside from that, it's mostly farmland. And for such a rural area with definitely a much less sparsely populated area compared to northern Illinois, it's definitely no surprise the least bit with the vast farmlands and fields and forests that are kind of scattered about throughout the landscape. It truly is a perfect area for an unknown creature to hide. So okay, real quick, howdy Roger, good to see you. Oh, you have been there, so I guess you know what I'm talking about then, Eric. So anyways, because we're going to be focusing on southern Illinois, the first cryptid that I have for this episode, and again, I'm not sure if you guys have heard of it, it's known as the Enfield Horror. No, not the one that occurred, of course, in the UK. Although both these events did occur in the 70s, the difference is the Enfield Horror occurred in the early 1970s. The one in the UK occurred in the late 70s. So in spite of that, there's no connection between the two cases whatsoever. And down in southern Illinois, we do have our own Enfield. So without further ado, let's get started, because again, I only have about 40 minutes, but that should be enough because this isn't really going to be that long of a slideshow, so it should be enough to fill up the entire slot. So I'm actually kind of a little bit glad that I started a little bit later than usual. So give me just 1 second just to make sure that this is working correctly, because I always got to check through the phone. Because, of how there's been so many changes that's been going on with the screen share. I have no idea what it is. So bear with me for just a minute here. And jeez, see, I hate it sometimes when these man, what I hate about sometimes when you're doing your own show is that you never get the notification yourself, even though it's your own, but it doesn't matter. Here we go. Okay, so as I said, and I gotta say, by the way, what you guys are about to see is certainly one of the most bizarre looking cryptids out there compared to many of the others. I forgot to add a fade. You know what? Yeah, you know what? Let me fix that real quick, because I always prefer to have the fade in added. So I guess I was in such a hurry that I didn't even get to have a chance to really at least put that one in. Okay, there we go. So now we're good. Let's try this again. All right. Now we're all set. So the first cryptid I have on this list is, like I said, is what's called the Enfield Horror, or also known as the Enfield Monsters. Definitely a very frightening looking creature, but again, a very bizarre one, because don't just judge by the face of it. It's a lot more bizarre than you think. So to give a little quick history, if you will, the vast reaches of forest and open fields of southern Illinois, combined with the sparse population in some areas, seem to invite weirdness that might not occur in cities and more crowded locals, like, of course, like I said, in Chicago. In the most southern portions of the region, the Shawnee National Forest covers miles and miles of territory. The acres of forest seem almost untouched by man, and some believe that strange things occasionally pass through here unseen by human eyes. This southern portion of the state is sometimes referred to as the Devil's Kitchen, a designation left behind by the Native Americans and the early settlers to explain strange sights and sounds like unexplained balls of lights, apparitions, screams in the night, and various other unsettling types of phenomena. The Native Americans often considered such sites as sacred, but the settlers usually believed them to be cursed or at least well avoided. The idea that such locations were linked to the devil was the first thought that crossed the minds of the Bible reading, God fearing folks, and they promptly set about to do two things. They learned to avoid these strange and haunted places, and secondly, they gave names to the spots to alert other visitors and settlers of the dangers of the area. In the case of the Devil's Kitchen, just about anything is possible, from ghost reports to UFO sightings to mysterious animals and weird monster sightings. Oh, I forgot to add a fade in that one too. Although Illinois is already home to phenomena such as strange lights, phantom black panthers, and thunderbirds, something even stranger briefly haunted the people of the town of Enfield. Perhaps the strangest monster reports to ever take place in Illinois began in April 1973 in the small town of Enfield, so well over now 50 years ago. This tiny community in southeastern Illinois became the scene of bizarre happenings for a short period of time, and while the case has largely been forgotten today, it remains a part of the high strangeness of the region. Henry McDaniel was among the first to encounter this terrible aberration, the Enfield Horror. And that's supposedly what it's apparently looks like. It has a few weird images to it. Alien, demon, or genetic mutation, the Enfield Horror is one of the absolute strangest creatures ever to be chronicled in cryptozoological lore. Also known as the Enfield Monster, this disturbing-looking beast makes its home in Enfield, Illinois. This tiny village boasts fewer than 600 residents today, a population drop of approximately 200 people since the beast made its first appearance. Perhaps what happened in Enfield back in the early 70s was terrifying enough to convince people to move away and never come back. The beast's own appearance, as described by various witnesses, sounds like something most reasonable people seek to avoid at all costs. Several people saw the monster, although many misdiscrepancies exist concerning its physical appearance. Regardless of exactly what it looks like, enough credible eyewitness accounts and evidence appears to back up the story. In other words, the Enfield Horror just might be real instead of merely an urban legend, and may still be waiting in Illinois for intrepid travelers and cryptid enthusiasts. According to eyewitnesses, the monster sports 2 legs, gray fur, huge glowing pink eyes, 2 arms attached to the front of its body, and stands approximately 4.5 feet tall. Additional reports state the beast's body resembles that of a monkey. At least one witness pointed out the body had a somewhat humanoid appearance. Despite its allegedly misshapen shape, the creature apparently boasts impressive speed and agility, including the ability to leap long distances, and it screeches like a wild cat. Just want to go back quickly to the comments to see see what everybody's saying. Oh, hey, George, you belong on the professional level, getting paid for what you do, mister. Thank you so much. Oh, my gosh. Yes, George, Scott. Okay, so real quick, guys, before I continue on, I definitely think it's best that I need to give a quick shout out. I'm probably going to be doing this on some of the other shows. I definitely would like to give a shout out for a real good paranormal brother of ours. He was a friend to all of us in the paranormal community. He had a guy by name, man by the name of Scott Grunwald. If you don't know who he is, excuse my language. He was known as the para whore, if you will. That's another story, but no, he was definitely a very professional paranormal investigator. He was a friend and brother to all of us in the paranormal field. He had a really good sense of humor. I had the opportunity to meet him myself a few times because we had him as a guest at the Chicago Ghost Conference. It's still a shame to know that he's gone. So rest in peace, brother. Now you can find all the answers we've been looking for in the afterlife. So rest in peace. We're going to miss you. Okay, so Eric, okay, you're 51 born. So, okay, so this happened 2 years after you were born then, Eric. They just described a juvenile Sasquatch. Well, they say it could very well be maybe some type of Sasquatch, but again, with its bizarre shape and appearance, it's really hard to say. But anyways, let's move forward to the sightings. So the bizarre string of events that would eventually stir the small Illinois town of Enfield into a frenzy of fear began on the chilly night of April 25th, 1973, when a young 10-year-old boy named Greg Garrett claimed to have been attacked by a truly bizarre beast while playing in his backyard catching fireflies while his parents were watching TV inside. The child described the being as an otherworldly abomination, which ran past him and stopped to stare at him, standing up to 5 feet tall, as having no less than 3 legs, a grayish slimy epidermis, short stumpy arms tipped with sharp claws, and glowing pinkish eyes. The creature apparently just stamped up and down on the boy's feet with its own 3 apparently sharp-clawed foot-like appendages that had enough strength to tearing his tennis shoes to shreds. Greg, crying hysterically, wasted no time in scurrying away from the fiend and retreating back into the relative safety of his parents' house. The police, who later investigated another report 30 minutes later, failed to find any tangible evidence in the family's yard. Now, although young Greg's encounter, and most people would think that, the kid was just having some hallucination or, was imagining things. That wasn't truly it, apparently, because although young Greg's encounter was technically the first on record, the one that brought this creature to notoriety came just a half hour later when the Garrett's neighbor, Henry McDaniel, and his family had their own face-to-face encounter with this unbelievable entity. At about 9:30 p.m. in the evening, Henry McDaniel and his wife returned home to find 2 of their children, Henry Jr. and Lil, in a terrified stupor. The children claimed that a thing had tried to break into the house by scratching the door and a window-mounted air conditioner while their parents were gone. It was then that they all heard a scratching sound at the front door. Assuming that it was some sort of stray animal, like a cat, like a dog, cat, or even a bear, a skeptical Henry McDaniel cavalierly approached the door and opened it and couldn't believe what he saw. What he saw before him would have shook even the most courageous man to the core. In another version, now it should be noted, yes, in another version, he headed outside into a strong wind and saw a creature between 2 rose bushes. But in most versions, it was when he opened the door is where he had his encounter. There, to his terror, was a creature that had 3 legs on it, a short body, 2 little short arms coming out of its breast area, and 2 glowing pink eyes as big as flashlights. It stood 4.5 feet tall and was grayish colored. He added later that it was almost like a human body. It was trying to get into the house. It was the same pink-eyed monstrosity that had terrified his own children and assailed Greg Garrett less than a half hour before. Needless to say, McDaniel was completely mortified by the sight of this horrible apparition and was not going to let it in and backed away from the entity in horror, slammed the door, stumbled to a nearby closet, and retrieved a flashlight and his 22 pistol. While his horrified family waited, Henry returned to the door and, with the conviction of a man dead set on defending his family and home, kicked open the door, revealing that his first vision of this unbelievable beast had not been a hallucination and opened fire. Henry proceeded to fire on the creature 4 times, and after his first shot, according to him, "When I fired that first shot, I know I hit it." The beast, instead of falling to the ground wounded or dead, hissed at him. Most sources say that it sounded rather like a wild cat, and then, as unbelievable as it may seem, it proceeded to bound away in long leaps across the yard, covering 50 to 75 feet in just 3 astonishing jumps, eventually becoming lost to McDaniel's sight as it made its way towards the railroad and the cover of the trees and disappeared into the brush along the railroad embankment near the house. Stunned by the encounter, Henry quickly proceeded to call the police, claiming to have seen a monster from outer space. When Illinois state troopers who responded to the call scene arrived, the only evidence of the encounter that remained were a series of scratches in the siding of the McDaniels' home and footprints that were very similar to a dog's in the yard. And these are the actual photos I was able to find. I believe that actually is Henry McDaniel. And it's the surprising thing, unlike you see with a lot of witnesses when it comes to these cryptids, is there's usually at least about one photograph of them. In the case with Henry McDaniel and Greg Garrett, I couldn't find any of them at all. And I've checked for years, but if my reports are correct, these might be the only known photos publicly available of Henry McDaniel. But there's something even more strange. As you guys can see, obviously, you could clearly see the scratches that were made on the windows here. Definitely very bizarre. So, no, that's actually the doorway, but you can kind of see a little bit of the scratches on the air conditioner. But it's kind of hard to see since it's in black and white. But perhaps the weirdest thing, more than anything else, like I just said, was its footprints. What made the prints so unusual was the fact that they had 6 toe pads instead of 4. And even more intriguingly, they represented a 3-footed animal, with one track being slightly smaller than the others. 2 of the tracks were 4 inches wide, while the print left by the 3rd foot was smaller. And again, this is the only known image that I know of that I've discovered that shows the actual tracks of this creature, and it's really bizarre. Many on the police force were skeptical about what McDaniel had seen, despite having just received news of the attack on Garrett just 30 minutes earlier. The police considered McDaniel to be rational and sober in his reporting of the incident. In a later press interview, McDaniel said, "If they do find it, they will find more than one, and they won't be from this planet. I can tell you that." The police couldn't find any trace of the entity, so things cooled down for the moment. Oh, I forgot to add fade-ins for these ones too. However, just about when McDaniel believed that his encounter with the unknown creature was a thing of the past, he would soon realize he was sadly mistaken. Less than 2 weeks on the eve of May 6th at 3 a.m., Henry was startled awake in the middle of the night by howling neighborhood dogs. He then pulled himself out of bed and once again pulled out his firearm, then with what must have been with great trepidation, opened his front door and encountered the creature again. This time, however, his encounter with this creature would not be so intimate. It was standing about near the railroad tracks. He claims he watched in puzzlement the creature at some distance, languidly negotiating the trestles of the railroad tracks near his home. "I saw something moving out on the railroad track, and there it stood, I didn't shoot at it or anything. It started on down the railroad track. It wasn't in a hurry or anything. This went on for several minutes until the creature casually bounced away into the night. Henry later called the radio station WWKI to report the second encounter and was later interviewed about both encounters, which again, in spite of it being recorded, I couldn't find the interview. Then, as is always the case with astounding events such as this, it wasn't long after word of the Enfield horror had gotten around and came out in full force. But it wasn't until McDaniel's second report that the media frenzy truly kicked into overdrive and people began to flock to the small town in hopes of seeing the creature. And this is typical. Like we see this occur if you kind of look at it from a good viewing perspective with a lot of these cryptids, especially a lot of these reports that occurred in the late 1960s and early to mid 1970s. There was always huge monster crazes that went on with a lot of these different cryptids. And in the case with the Enfield horror, clearly that was no exception. So it's crazy to think in those days you would have just these monster hunters that would just come by. Although, even though I know a lot of them really want to try to hunt down or even just get a chance to see this creature, it of course created a lot of controversy, which you're about to see in this case. Again, the Enfield horror is no exception. Used as a case study for a paper on social contagion in 1978, sociologists cite the episode as an example of collective behavior, where a group or crowd can be affected by the spread of group emotions such as panics, hysterias, collective visions, and extreme instances of suggestibility. They were very enthusiastic, but they were also intrusive. This prompted the local White County Sheriff, Roy Porchard Jr., who was so perturbed by the sudden influx of press and curiosity seekers, to warn McDaniel about keeping his mouth closed, or he would threaten to incarcerate McDaniel if he didn't stop inciting panic by spreading his wildly terrifying tale. But it was too late. As you can see from this newspaper report, which again was the only known newspaper I was able to find on this case, over the next few months, the crowds began to grow larger, bringing a good amount of publicity that the small, quaint rural town was not used to. With the larger crowds of curiosity seekers came increased alarm among the citizens of Enfield. Some among them were genuine monster hunters and curiosity seekers, while others were just hunters or thrill seekers with guns, actually bringing whatever the creature was down. Just want to go back. Just want to give a quick shout out to everybody, to more of the comments quickly. Okay, I already read that. That's a torch to the people in the UK. Yeah, it pretty much is. Why does this make me think it was an alien? Well, they say suppose. We'll get to that a little bit later, Eric. Hello, Laura. Good to see you. All right. What's up, Tom? Good to see you. Okay, so let's see. Getting back to the slideshow. Okay. Now, to make matters worse, well-armed, possessive amateur monster hunters began patrolling the area near the L&N railroad track sightings. This alarmed the locals, as the last thing they wanted in their previously peaceful, quiet community was a bunch of trigger-happy thrill seekers out in the woods with loaded guns and alcohol. This forced the sheriff's hand, particularly when he had to arrest 5 young gun-toting hunters as threats to public safety and for hunting violations after attempting to photograph and carrying shotguns and rifles for protection and shooting at a gray thing, identical to the one that Garrett and McDaniel encountered, with the notable addition being that they described the thing as hairy on May 8th. So even if basically the sheriff was there to arrest them, you could pretty well say that this was, if you want to put the fourth official sighting of this creature. They had apparently they had seen the creature hiding in some underbrush, and 2 of the men proceeded to open fire on it. And much like in the McDaniel case, Their bullets were unable to cause mortal injury, and the monster bolted off at a speed that eyewitnesses surmised was greatly in excess of any that a human being could achieve. Sheriff Poshar Jr. didn't believe a word of it and dismissed reports of this as a pose of gun-toting thrill seekers and monster hunting expedition as an exaggeration, saying that the men were just out drinking and raising hell, mentioning the monster only briefly during questioning, which I can understand why they probably didn't say, because if they said that, they obviously would think he would have obviously thought that these guys were drunk off their asses, of course. If that wasn't enough, however, two other hunters, Mike Mogul and Roger Tappy, both from Elwood, Indiana, both swore that they had witnessed a gray monkey dashing through the underbrush, which had moved too quickly for them to get a good shot at it. So if that wasn't enough, so this, you can kind of say this was now sighting number 5. Sheriff Poshar Jr. made numerous threats against Henry McDaniel, which, it should be noted, had no effect whatsoever, who was convinced that there was something very strange going on. Shortly thereafter, once the frenzy of hunters and tourists had died down, believe it or not, 4 more people saw the Enfield horror. On Sunday, May 6th, hours after McDaniel's second encounter with the creature earlier in the morning, Rick Rainbow, then news director of radio station WWKI in Kokomo, Indiana, was searching an area with 3 other friends when they saw something. They didn't get much of a look at it, as it was hiding in the shadows and had its back towards them. But they did describe it that it was around 5.5 feet tall, ape-like, gray, and stooped over, loping through the woods near an abandoned house, which it was reported was nearby Garrett and McDaniel's homes. The entity was reported to move with an unnatural speed, far faster than a man could run. They fired a shot at it, but it quickly vanished from the 4 men's sight into the forest. Although they did not get a very good look at it, or have nearly as close, or for that matter, as harrowing an encounter as the previous sets of witnesses, Rainbow and his crew did manage one thing the others had not: capturing the monster's disturbing, strange hissing scream on a tape recorder, which was also heard by others who tried to track down the creature. Unfortunately, however, because I know some of you guys are probably asking, do I have that recording? Unfortunately, as of 2023, 50 years later, that recording is not publicly available. But I am hoping maybe one day either they'll release it publicly, maybe on YouTube. And I have checked YouTube, it's still not there. But if I have to go all the way down to Enfield, or if WWKI in Kokomo, Indiana still exists, if they still have that tape recording, I definitely would like to hear it for myself, just for my own personal satisfaction of wanting to know what exactly did that scream sound like, or better yet, what exactly it was that they captured in 50 years ago in May of 1973. That would be really interesting, but maybe someday it will eventually become publicly available. But like I say, as of right now, sadly, it's not. Over the next several days, the screams and cries were heard frequently near the railroad tracks close to McDaniel's home. It was then noted that noted cryptozoologist Loren Coleman, along with Chicago paranormal expert Richard Crowe, God rest his soul. He sadly passed away over 10 years ago. He actually ran the Chicago tours really until his death in 2012. Loren Coleman is still alive, and some of you guys may recognize him because he's featured on a lot of the cryptid shows, and I've had the opportunity to meet him at the Mothman Festival a couple years ago. Got to talk to him a few times on Facebook. Even though we don't talk frequently to each other, he's a very good friend regardless. Really well known cryptozoologist. Now, Coleman, as he would normally do, interviewed locals. He also did have the opportunity as well listen to the rainbow recording and search through the area looking for any signs of the beast. Coleman and Crow even went to the actual home of McDaniel to investigate. And while they were there, Lauren claimed, get this, you don't hear this very often from a cryptozoologist. Lauren claimed to have actually heard the creature's wailing for himself. I traveled to Enfield, interviewed the witnesses, looked at the siding of the house the Enfield monster had damaged, heard some strange screeching banshee like sounds, and walked away bewildered, said Coleman. A short time later, the sightings ended as abruptly as they began. No explanation was ever given as to what this bizarre monster may have been, where it may have come from, or where it disappeared to. Some had surmised that perhaps, and this is what you were just thinking, this kind of answers to what you were just asking about, Eric. Some had surmised that perhaps it was connected to UFO activity that was also reported in the general area at the time, but we will never really know for sure the true origin of the Enfield horror. The incidents were reported widely in the press at the time. It appeared in newspapers throughout the state on April 27th, and on May 7th, there was an interview on radio station, which is our own station here locally, WGN, Chicago, and articles in the Chicago Daily News, the Malign Dispatch, Champaign-Urbana Courier, and the Alton Telegraph. So even this got spread out throughout. Essentially, it just seemed like all of this news that occurred throughout the entire state, including our own local news station here in Chicago, WGN. There were earlier articles in the Carmi Times, and an updated summary of the events appeared in Pennsylvania's Reading Eagle in August. After the arrest of the 5 men who arrived to hunt the creature, residents of Enfield expressed fears that press coverage would lead to further monster hunts who might inadvertently shoot citizens or livestock. So the question really is, what in the world was the Enfield horror? There have been many theories put forward over the years to try to come to some understanding of this bizarre story, running from the rational to the more fantastical. It was suggested that the creature may have actually been a kangaroo escaped from a nearby zoo, which would explain the 3 legs description, as the tails of kangaroos looks like a 3rd leg. The problem, however, though, is that a kangaroo really looks nothing like what was described, leaves different tracks than what were found. And when faced with this possibility, the main witness, Henry McDaniel, was adamant that the creature wasn't no kangaroo, having owned such a creature as a pet while on military service in Australia, and noting that kangaroos have narrow faces and tracks that leave claw marks. Following media coverage of the creature, an Ohio man contacted a local newspaper stating that the creature may have been his pet kangaroo, Macy, which had been lost or stolen a year previously. A few days after the event, United Press International quoted an anthropology student who suggested that the creature may have been a wild ape, knowing that such animals had been reported throughout the Mississippi area since 1941. Yet this also does not truly fit descriptions of this weird creature, which I should have put a photo of a kangaroo. You would obviously see clearly a big difference between a normal kangaroo and this strange monster. In 1978, researchers at Western Illinois University, headed by David L. Miller, investigated and analyzed the incident, publishing it as a case study in Social Contagion, whereby large groups or crowds of people can be influenced by group emotions such as panic, hysteria, collective visions, and extreme instances of suggestibility. The researchers found that there were no more than 3 first-hand reports that had subsequently been exaggerated by news stories and local gossip into an epidemic, which is again what they also sometimes call these monster crazes. According to the researchers, the Enfield horror reports had their base in just a handful of sightings, which then had proceeded to cause panic and flame out of control with exaggeration in the media and wild rumors among the populace until it had all reached a state of hysteria of epidemic proportions. According to the study, in this area of southern Illinois, it is not unreasonable to assume Henry McDaniel or the radio news team had actually seen an animal. People we interviewed framed the recent events in these terms. Their accounts admitted the possibility that large dogs, calves, bears, deer, and wildcats have been sighted. Finally, some people tactfully suggested that McDaniel had a notoriously overactive imagination and had probably been shooting at shadows. In any event, we interviewed only one person, I guess they interviewed only one person who agreed with McDaniel's claim that he had indeed seen a monster from outer space. According to Coleman, in his later book, Bigfoot, The True Story of Apes in America, as like I just briefly mentioned, there was a flap of different monster sightings in the Midwest before, during, and years after Enfield, yielding colorful names like Momo and the Big Muddy Monster. In the July 1974 edition of Fate magazine, Loren Coleman and Jerome Clark featured the Enfield horror in an article entitled Swamp Slobs Invade Illinois. That's quite an interesting name. Coleman even chronicled discussing this intriguing case with famed paranormal investigator as well as best-selling The Mothman Prophecies author John A. Keel in his book Mothman and Other Curious Encounters. Years later, Coleman would contrast his Enfield investigation with another he conducted regarding a legendary unclassified creature that many assume was also from out of this world, a melon-headed monster known as the Dover Demon. The Dover Demon. The Enfield horror was my case investigation. It was much different than the Dover Demon, however, and was more like a combo phantom kangaroo, devil monkey, and swamp ape situation, said Coleman. Other investigators have suggested that the monster was a genetic experiment gone awry and escaped, or mostly associated with a spate of UFO sightings that allegedly plagued the region during the same period. And those with a more supernatural bent have asserted that this beast, with its tendencies to be aggressive towards humans and try to break into their homes, has all the earmarks of a classic demon attack, as it would make it an actual literal demon. Oh, wait a minute. That's weird. I could have sworn that there was, you know what? Hang on. Oh, okay. You know what? Okay, so I accidentally added this picture right here of these two guys here. I was supposed to put it in the other slide. I'll get to who those guys are in the next slide. So here's the thing. This would not be the first time that it has been suggested that there is an apparent ET occult connection. While the phenomenon are not directly related, a primary witness in the Northport Devil case, Michael Rowley, also claims that creatures that have been skulking around the house he shares with his son in the West Florida community of Northport are of both extraterrestrial and demonic origin, making them, in effect, aliens from hell. So I'll have to correct that after I get off here. Add the picture on the right slide. There is also, of course, the possibility that the Enfield horror never really existed at all. Several red flags go up when one considers that the main sightings were made by Henry McDaniel, and one of the other witnesses, Greg Garrett, would later retract his report, believe it or not, and said that it had been something to tease Mr. M and have fun with an out-of-town newsman. As for the hunters who had seen the creature, it has been postulated that these men had been influenced by the strange stories and had either made up their accounts or misidentified other wildlife in a panic. Now, however, even though this small amount of sightings of the Enfield horror was brief, there's a possibility that something like this may have happened before, about 30 years over. So let's go back briefly 30 years prior to 1973. So it should be noted that between the years of 1941 and 1942, in the sleepy village of Mount Vernon, Illinois, which is ironically less than 40 miles away from Enfield, there was a similar spate of encounters involving an anomalous leaping beast that terrorized the local populace and was reputably responsible for numerous livestock deaths and mutilations in the region. The locals called the creature the Mount Vernon Monster. During the summer of 1941, Reverend Marsh Harpole was hunting squirrels along the Gum Creek bottom near Mount Vernon when a large animal that looked like something like a baboon leaped out of a tree and walked upright toward the startled hunter. Harpole, in turn, struck the creature with his barrel and then frightened it away by firing a couple shots into the air, basically warning shots. In the months that followed this incident, rural families would report hearing terrifying screams at night in the wooded bottomlands along the creeks. Hunters sometimes found mysterious tracks. By the early spring of 1942, after the killing of a farm dog near Bonnie, large parties of volunteers, some with rifles and shotguns, others with nets and ropes, scoured the creek bottoms. But like in many other cases, the creature easily evaded them, perhaps because of its reputed ability to leap from 20 to 40 feet in a single bound, and in fact appeared as much as 40 or 50 miles from the location of the original sighting in Jackson and Ocala counties. Finally, it disappeared and was not seen again. Eyewitnesses claim that the Mount Vernon monster was vaguely baboon-like in appearance and was able to leap anywhere from 20 to 40 feet in a single bound. It is unclear just what connection, if any, the Mount Vernon monster has to the Enfield horror. However, this creature is likened more to the devil monkey than the Enfield horror, which, considering its baboon-like appearance, I could see that. However, that's still not to say it is a possibility that the Mount Vernon monster and the Enfield monster, it's a possibility. It is a possibility that this was in fact the same creature. And finally, to put it to an end, because I only got, oh wow, I got to really end this. It's already 6 o'clock, so I'm actually right on the last slide. So as far as how things have been in Enfield today, it is possible. It is possible that the Enfield horror, whatever it may be, is working. I mean, is it possible that the Enfield horror, whatever it may be, is working on a 30-year cycle? While there are no reputable accounts of the creature hailing from the 21st century, one cannot entirely count out the possibility that the thing is a long slumbering and not anatomical oddity that rears its head every so often to feed on animals and terrify locals. Or stranger yet, an ET that only stops by for a bite every so often when it's in this neck of the galaxy. As strange as cryptozoology and the potential existence of undiscovered mystery monsters are, it seems that there will always be certain accounts that stand out as particularly bizarre. These are the cases that seem to transcend the notion of mere hidden flesh and blood animals and takes us into the realm of the truly weird. Even if such cases as the Enfield horror turns out to be nothing more than flights of fancy, they do seem to show that there are many strange facets to cryptozoological phenomena, and that there are certain factors, whatever those may ultimately be, that serve to muddy the waters and ensure that there will always be mysteries of the unknown that we may forever fail to come to a complete understanding of. Whatever this creature is or is not, it has not been reported in 50 years. That, however, does not mean that it's not still lurking in the shadows of some old train yard, waiting to return to scratch on another door in the wee hours of the night. And that is officially it of the first cryptid related episode of Nick Files. So hopefully you guys really enjoyed it. I do have to get off in another minute because I know 2 shows are about to be broadcasting. Real quick, just to get to all the shout outs. Hello, Allison. Good to see you from Ansonia, Connecticut. Yes, it's definitely good evening. Wow, you were in high school in Tom. Unbelievable. Finding out more and more than that alien sightings and cryptid sightings go. Yeah, they do. The cryptids that I'm covering for this year, Eric, for this season, you're going to see that a lot with a lot of the cryptids that I have on my list. So you'll see more of it. Hey, Kate's in the house. Kate, who we'll be interviewing tomorrow on Supernatural Talk. I'm really looking forward to chatting with her again. I'm definitely glad you enjoy it. Okay, so real quick, as far as for next week, because seeing that this is a real good success with the first episode being a cryptid related one, so the second cryptid I have involved, again, not very well known, although it was featured at one time on a segment of Monsters and Mysteries in America, and it's another Illinois cryptid. And what's kind of even stranger, this event actually occurred 2 months or about a month after the Enfield horror sightings that occurred. And this also occurred too, in this case, more in southwestern Illinois, like just 2 hours away, I believe, from Enfield. And you could pretty much say this is Illinois' version of Bigfoot. It is a creature. Again, some of you guys may have heard, this one might sound a little bit more familiar because, again, it's been on Monsters and Mysteries in America. They've recently made a book. I think Chad Lewis just recently wrote a book about it, and I think they're even trying to make a documentary about it. I believe I got to go back and look. And the next creature I have involved, for next week, like I said, is pretty much considered Illinois' version of Bigfoot, the Big Muddy Monster, or also known as the Murfreesboro Mud Monster, and that's kind of almost a part 2, if you will, because again, it happened really not long after the Enfield horror sighting. So in some way, it's like a part 2. I'm pretty much picking up from where the events from in Southern Illinois left off, and it's going to be a really good show. So I'm glad you guys all enjoyed it. Anyways, I got to get off here because, again, I know there's 2 shows running right now. I know Grizzly's on, I believe, on Things Network, and then I know there's another show on Pack Channel, so I do have to wrap up. I'll see some of you guys tomorrow night on Supernatural Talk. As to the Grave and Back will not be airing tomorrow afternoon, as Lois will be on an investigation, and I'll also be on. Although I think we'll be back for Frighteners on Friday. So either way, got a couple of things coming up, and that's interesting, Allison, that you brought it up. You believe Bigfoot is a spirit. I definitely would love to say more about that, but like I said, I do have to get off. But if you could wait till next time, Allison, we'll talk about that. But yes, but like I said, for Nick Files, next week will be the Murfreesboro Mud Monster. It will be another great episode. Hope you guys will enjoy it. And I know I'll see some of you guys tomorrow night for Supernatural Talk, but as like I always like to say at the end, I was just talking about that, Johnny. So again, like I said, I always do this for you guys, and I'm glad you guys always enjoy it every time I put these together. So thank you guys all so much. I'll see some of you guys tomorrow night. But now what I was about to say was, but unless you want to wait till the next episode of Nick Files, I will see you guys next week. You guys all have a great night.